Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
A massive warm welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, where today I have no guests. Why? Well, I'm going to let you take a little peek around the curtain, because before I went on holiday, I recorded 16 podcast interviews to ensure that you all had something to listen to while I was away. And when I returned, I had another 8 episodes booked in. But guess what happened? 3 guests cancelled on me. Sorry for the late notice, but the guest is in a meeting, I was had to dash for a flight. All those usual kind of excuses. But hey, that's just how it happens sometimes, and I'm not rocking back and forth in my chair here, just biting my nails manically. And we do have 10 guests a week booked in until mid-April, so I think we're going to be okay. And I'm going to let you in to a bit of a secret here. I quite enjoy it when this happens, as I get the microphone to myself, and I can sneak in a cheeky chat with you all, and maybe have just a little catch-up. And I'll also admit I am quite a lazy person, so if I get the same questions multiple times, it's sometimes easier to answer you all on here, just by answering the question on the podcast. And in the last 2 weeks, I've received emails from Leslie in the US, Steve the UK, Vladimir in Bulgaria, and Max in the Netherlands, who've all asked a very similar question around where the listeners to this podcast are actually located. And the emails typically begin with a line such as, "You say that you have listeners in 165 countries on your podcast, but where is your biggest audience? Is it the UK?" Well, believe it or not, this show's biggest audience share is actually in the US. But here are the top 10 countries where people listen to this show. And from the top, we have the US, then the UK, then India, Germany, Australia, France, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and China. And at the end of every show, I also ask everybody to rate and review this podcast on iTunes, as it really does help bring more listeners this way, because the algorithm will pretty much look and say, if a show's got more likes, more subscribers, more listens, the show must be good, so we'll move it up the rankings a little. But one of the strange things about how they manage that is that all the reviews are only able to be seen in each country's iTunes. And of course, it's impossible for me to wade through all of them, opening it in the US store, closing it, then opening it in the Moroccan iTunes store. You're just never going to do it. But I recently found a great tool that lets me see exactly where this show is doing well. And I quickly found that the Tech Blog Writer Podcast has been riding up the download charts for tech podcasts in Zimbabwe, Albania, Vietnam, Slovakia, and Swaziland. What an eclectic mix, and I absolutely love that. But more than anything though, I would love if new and old regular listeners of this podcast would actually just reach out and email me at techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, or get me on Instagram at Neil C. Hughes, and let me know exactly where in the world you listen to this show. Sure, I'd love to give you all a shout out and actually show everyone that's listening how we're all learning about how tech is transforming industries and tearing down geographical borders together. And if you are on Instagram, add me on there, because I'd love to see the world through your eyes and where you listen to this podcast. But again, don't just add me. I want you to send me a note. I mean, if I'm spending every day talking directly into your ears, it's about time you said hello and we got to know each other a little bit better. So feel free to put in the subject line, long-time listener, first-time emailer. In fact, I've never even contacted a podcast or radio show ever before, and I don't know why I'm doing that. So let's shake things up and change all that, and just send me a quick, easy hello.
You have email.
Now, I do have a few quick emails and questions I wanted to go through today. And the first is from Matt Mason, who says, "Neil, you always knock sensationalist, negative tech headlines in the media, and I agree with you. But," he goes on to say, "Neil, I want you to level with me. Is there anything that you don't like that's happening in tech at the moment, or anything that just concerns you?" Whew. Dare I say the name of tech's very own potential Bond villain, Mark Zuckerberg, or the social media platform Facebook? I know everybody's talking about it at the minute, but what concerns me is it seems to me that social media is, for want of a better phrase, screwed at the moment because there's so many negative headlines around echo chambers, misinformation, privacy breaches, and so much more. So it appears that Facebook and its family of apps are now actually retreating from social media and targeting messaging and communication. Because let's face it, all those juicy conversations that we're all having, they're not in the public domain. They are on group chats on a variety of messaging platforms. So when Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg recently published a blog post promoting his new privacy-focused vision for Facebook, without any hint of irony, I may add, I was more than a little apprehensive. Especially considering they're looking at uniting Facebook Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp and even SMS. Because I'm immediately asking myself the implications of enabling one company with a reputation of having a disturbing disregard for user privacy being in control of all of our communication methods. And by combining all the online identities that many intended to keep separate and for good reason, could open a huge can of worms for a lot of people. And privacy, choice and control, I think, would appear the first casualties of such an aggressive move by an advertising company in the guise of a social media platform. And I want everyone listening to think about this for just a few moments. Think about every person that you've contacted from your smartphone in the last 30 days. I suspect that most of your conversations fell into the bracket of Facebook Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp and SMS. Now imagine one company having access to all of that communication, especially one with a bad reputation. And for me, that is much, much more scary than any of the headlines around artificial intelligence and automation. But that's just the ramblings of a tech podcast host. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. So again, let me know your tech fears or anything that concerns you about the tech industry.
Message for you, sir.
Next up, I have a question from Stacey Cunningham in New Jersey. Or should I say, New Jersey? Sorry. I do love Italian-American gangster shows and movies. And I was raised on that stuff. And I must admit, when I hear the name Cunningham, I also think of Stephen King's Christine movie. Sorry, Stacey, I do digress there. She asks, "Hey Neil, I'm interested in making money starting my own podcast and turning it into a business. I love how you offer a service that removes the hassle of editing and publishing, so I only have to record the interview. But the question I've got is, how can I monetize it from the offset? Thanks in advance, Stacey." I must admit, whenever I see thanks in advance, I always think, it's borderline passive-aggressive because you will do this for me now and I'm thanking you for doing it. Maybe that's just me reading too much into stuff. And don't get me started on exclamation marks either. But I think that is because the email communication just has no intonation at all. So you can't tell if the author is happy, sad, angry or sarcastic. But again, sorry, I digress. I think the lack of structure in these solo shows highlights just how many crazy ideas buzz around my head and I just reach out and grab them without the luxury of a filter sometimes. But to answer your question, Stacey, I bring a little bit of bad news because I'm afraid there is no quick answer. If I'm completely honest with you, the reality of you making money from any podcast, especially right from the beginning, completely on its own, are slim to none. And I always think the trick is to build a podcast around your existing business, not the other way around. So imagine if you've got a small business doing anything at all, you're going to be creating blog content, and that's going to be posted across social media, all geared around your own business website and building relationships with your audience. And a podcast really is exactly the same as a blog post, a vlog, or a website post. It's about complementing your business, your brand, and broadcasting who you are, what you stand for, and creating a meaningful dialogue with your audience by serving them, not selling to them. And it's interesting that you sent this over, Stacey, because I was chatting with David Ralphs the other day, and he's the host of the Join Up Dots podcast, and we were talking about some of the big name podcasters out there have all become almost unlistenable because it's all about selling their services and webinars and even guest webinars. And we're probably a little bit different from a lot out there because we're both hosts that try to deliver value and meaningfully serving our audience. But hey, they make more money than both me and Dave, I suspect, so maybe we're the foolish ones. I kind of like the idea of serving my audience rather than selling to them. So for that reason alone, Stacey, I'm going to say you don't need my help launching a podcast yet. I want you to focus on creating a business first and then build content around it. But remember, when you are ready, a podcast can be transcribed into a blog post, an Instagrammable image, or even a video on YouTube. But at the heart of all that must be business first. I hope that makes sense. But if anyone is listening that has a successful business or is building a business and wants help launching a podcast, feel free to send me a quick email to techblogwriter@outlook.com and I'll gladly help you or even just point you in the right direction.
There is a message for you.
And we also have an email from Gary Fitzgerald in Australia. I must admit, I thought Garys were disappearing from the world. Gary, if you have a son, you must name him Gary Jr. or something because we need to keep your name alive. Seriously though, Gary asks, Neil, what are your tech gripes? Reading your questions here, it seems you're trying to find out with a chink in my arm. I'm always very positive about technology. And, we've already had a question around things that concern me in tech. And now, obviously, Gary's asking what my tech gripes are. I can see where you guys are going with these. But if I'm honest, charging is the bane of my life. It seems that I'm constantly having to charge a myriad of devices every day, including headphones. And it also seems I'm constantly looking for a wall socket when I'm abroad or covering an event somewhere. So for any phone manufacturers listening, I don't want a foldable phone. I want one that I don't have to charge and the screen won't shatter into 1,000 pieces when I drop it from 12 inches off the ground. But outside of that, I think we need to talk about software patches. So first of all, here comes a disclaimer. I advise each and every person listening that they must download and apply every security patch as it is crucial to protecting you and your network. But, and here comes the but, when I occasionally do get the opportunity to just sit down and relax, I usually switch on my Xbox first. And very often it will say, you can't play anything right now until you complete this hour-long update. So I try and get ahead of the game and I start that update and then switch on my PS4. Which says the same. So I then find myself sitting there for an hour as two consoles perform security updates. And yes, it's my fault, but untimely and aggressively pestering updates drive me nuts. And I think many of you listening will, when you get those reminders, whether it be on a computer or your phone, I think we're all guilty of hitting remind me later on more than a few occasions. Finally, online payments. We're all living in a digital age, but sending payments seems to be stuck in the dark ages. And if we have any crypto or Bitcoin enthusiasts listening, yes, it's incredibly cool and exciting technology, but the idea of my gran getting past two-factor authentication, copying a long, complicated Bitcoin address, and then sending crypto to the other side of the world and waiting for an hour for it to complete is equally as insane and unuser-friendly as the archaic processes that banks put me through when just trying to make or receive an international payment. But I am all in on fintech, eradicating my first world problems and solving that problem with international payments. But what are your tech gripes or first world problems? I'd love to hear your rants and your insights too. So please remember, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com or tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. Now, as you all know, I also like to grab a hot coffee or cold beer with my guests and listeners when I'm out on my travels. And on March the 24th, I'm heading to Vegas to cover the innovative, informative and inspiring Adobe Summit. So if anyone listening is in town for that show, let me know. And this year's event has some pretty eclectic guests, including the Microsoft CEO and even Reese Witherspoon, which is a little bit bizarre. And if you are not there, I implore you to watch the live streams and just learn a little bit more about the work that Adobe is doing with real-time personalised digital experiences. Because I find it incredibly interesting what they're aiming to do there. It's a fantastic event, and even though it might sound glamorous, it's actually me being locked inside a hotel for a few days without seeing any sunlight as I go around hunting for guests to go on this podcast. Am I complaining? Hell no, that's what I love to do. But maybe you can help me with a slight problem. Traditionally at the event, on a Thursday evening, they have an after-show party with unlimited food, drink and a gig. And over the last few years, I've wandered around, hoovering up food and watching Death Cab for a Cutie, Beck, and this year they have The Killers playing. What's the problem, Hughes, I hear you all saying? Well, the prospect of dancing to Mr. Brightside on my own with buffet food for one isn't the same as having a chat and a bit of a laugh with a guest or listener to this show. So if you are in town, food and drinks are on me. Or should I say Adobe maybe. But if you are at the event, maybe we could enjoy the Killers together on a warm Vegas night. Or, of course, feel free to say, get out of here, needy podcast host weirdo. I'll stick with just listening to the podcast, thanks. That is completely fine too. But keep your questions coming in. I love to hear from you guys, and I love to see your photos of where you listen to this show. And you may be glad or sad to hear that we've got a week full of guests just waiting to get on this show, and normal service will be resumed tomorrow. So I hope you join me for another week of learning how technology is transforming multiple industries and learning from some of the biggest names in technology and business. But it's time for me to go now, so a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.